I passed Adam just a minute ago, just chatting with him. He said the only downside is I have to wait till after class. Why can't we do it now? And I thought
That's a great question. That's a great question.
and I didn't want to be out of state.
And if you just known him, when he came to our house in 2017, he was like a wild jungle boy. We had to sit out in the parking lot many a time because he would not even come in to church. So God has been working mightily in that boy's life.
And he's been working through you all, so praise be to God, but praise be to you all too. So,
I heard him walking up the stairs complaining.
He's getting
After wait till 8 o'clock. Yeah.
I know.
It's taking too long.
All right, in his prayer, Bruce mentioned the idea that we are created for relationships. I want to, before I get into some other questions that will guide my study that I'll be leading in my class, what would you say are the differences between how culture defines romance and relationship and how God defines romance and relationship? What would you say some of the differences are?
I don't think we have enough time.
Well, I said some of the differences.
To fully parse that one out. Self-sacrificing is one big difference. Relationships nowadays, it's what do I want? It's about me. So.
What can you do for me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you don't, well, then I'll find somebody different.
Relationships are more sexual. That's what they consider a relationship. A romantic.
Yeah.
Instead of relationship. Getting to know and live together and work together and be there for each other.
So it's not really based on love.
What can you do for me?
Yeah.
Relationships are disposable.
And God meant for them to be permanent. When Jesus was asked about that, he was very, very clear spoken about it. What else?
And surely pleasure driven.
Pleasure driven.
Simply pleasure driven.
Yeah. I oftentimes use, when I do premarital counseling, I'll often use the explanation that when God created Eve, it wasn't let's make a deal. You know, you can have the one behind the curtain or the one behind the box or the other, you know, or the one that you see. You know, God said, here's the one I created for you, now love her. And you know, historically, with parents choosing or some kind of arrangement prior to adulthood happening, that was still the kind of mode that romance and relationships developed from. In fact, when our children were young at home, Laurie and I would ask them from time to time, what would you think if that was the case now? And they didn't trust us. And I kept thinking, well, what makes you trust you? You know? But you're right, there's so many differences. Anything else that's popped up in your head as we've talked that seems really significant?
I saw a video, and it's probably more for people younger than us, but it was a brief sermon topic out of Proverbs, he who finds a wife finds a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they made the point that it says the person finds a wife because the lady's character is like a wife. She's not his wife until he marries her. But too many times we're focused on a girlfriend and developing that progression, and if you just act like a girlfriend, boys just play with you.
Mm.
But if you behave like a wife, then he who finds one who's behaving like a wife finds a good thing and makes her his wife.
Mm.
And I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it is. So the question is, are you looking for a wife? Are you looking for a girlfriend?
I think too, our society certainly in some ways, especially in marriage, it's somebody that completes me. You know, that kind of rather than one is we get married and we're drawing one another closer to God, and in that relationship is I need somebody to fill in the empty spaces in my life, and you're looking to a person to fill those voids, and that's a poor recipe most of the time.
Yes,
All
it
the
is.
time. But
Well, what we're going to see tonight is there's a lot a lot to offer as far as example to emulate. And before we get to the text itself, I want to ask another kind of introductory question. Matchmaking has been around since the dawn of time. God was the first matchmaker, putting Adam and Eve together. Some matches work wonderfully, others not so well. What do you think about matchmaking?
It can't be worse.
Can't be worse
It can't
than-
be worse than everybody finding their own.
Okay.
Right? I mean, we're already at 50%, right? So
I've got a daughter-in-law that was through one of these dating matchmaking systems.
Yeah.
I mean, there is some things there that may be good, but
Okay.
you know, it depends on the matchmaker.
exactly.
I think too many. I deal with parents on a fairly regular basis, and we want what's best for our kids, but what's best for our kids may not always be what we want. In the sense of, I've got one specific parent that it's if their kid's not getting the glory, it's hard. It's pretty much silence if other kids are doing really well, but when their kids do something well, I'm gonna make sure I get a text and a video and a something, and it's that kind of thing. They're gonna push and push and push and push for their kid to get, and they may choose a spouse, but it may be the most glamorous choice because that guy's got the most money and that guy's got the nicest car and the nicest house, but that guy's a royal jerk.
Mm-hmm.
And you miss David. Well, he's not a great example at times, but the point is you miss the character of God versus the glitz.
Yeah.
The Saul and the David. It's kind of that picture.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think you make a great point. It depends on who the matchmaker is. If they have the values and discernment, they might make good matchmakers, but if they don't have the values and discernment, they don't make good matchmakers. My brother married when he was 37, I think, and he had all kinds of people through the years trying to matchmake for him, and he just generally did not enjoy that because people had friends, and I think people meant well, but they didn't have good discernment or proper values to be matchmaking.
Well, even after you're married, Karen and I was talking, and she said, you wouldn't believe how many people over the years have said, why do you stay with Jimmy? He's disabled, you should dump him. I said, well, I seriously hope they're not your Christian friends, but that's the worldview.
Yep.
If you're not getting what you want out of that and that looks horrible, dump it. Go
Yeah.
do something else.
Well,
whoa.
Yeah, and so as we move into the text, Naomi is part of a culture with a guardian redeemer. She knows what kind of woman Ruth is, and she's learning very quickly what kind of man Boaz is, and so it makes sense to her. So let's get into it. Somebody read Ruth 3, 1 through 6.
One day Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not try to find a home for you, where you will be well provided for? Is not Boaz, with whose servant girls you have been, a kinsman of ours? Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash and perfume yourself, and put on your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." I will do whatever you say, Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do.
All right. Naomi seems much less bitter since Boaz has entered the picture. She now feels compelled to find a husband for her daughter-in-law Ruth. How would Ruth marrying Boaz potentially affect Naomi? And I think this is an important point because it reveals something about Naomi. So how could a marriage of Ruth to Boaz potentially affect Naomi?
Brings a man back into the family, a provider.
All right, and so in what sense are you using that? As a good thing, bad thing?
No, it's a good thing. She's thinking this is a good thing. This is a beneficial thing for me if you go do this. I will receive blessings as a side note because of your relationship with him.
Okay, possibly, yeah. Other maybe not as positive possibilities. Well, let me throw one out there. If she marries Ruth off to Boaz, she's alone.
She's counting on the character of Ruth.
She is, but she is, and again, she has learned the character of her daughter-in-law, but there is still the potential that she's left out in this circumstance. And the reason I share that is because it reveals that this was an initiative that truly seems to be a selfless initiative. I don't think that she was doing it out of a desire to promote her own status or to enhance her well-being. I think she really wanted to bless Ruth. Other thoughts about that? How it would affect Naomi?
This is really just a variation on what we've already said, that when she returned from Moab, she made the statement about, I went away full and I've returned empty, and laid that at the feet of God as being responsible for that happening. If Ruth and Boaz come together in that Redeemer situation, and then they have a child, we know the end of the story. The women of the town say God has given a son not to Ruth, but to Naomi. Mm-hmm. And so in that sense, there's the chance of her being filled again. Mm-hmm. So it's a variation on the good that can come to her by Boaz coming into the family and being the Redeemer. And the way the story is written, it's good for Ruth too, but Naomi's the one who is the main beneficiary of this redemption.
And I want to make that point blatant. And that is, again, assuming, and I think it's a very safe assumption that Ruth is truly trying to be selfless in this. As is often the case, our truly selfless gestures are rewarded in ways we don't expect. I think that's an important point to make to the class. Because for the reasons we talked about early on, about what differentiates people in the world and their idea of romance and marriage from God's ideal, our idea, is that many people in the world, because they're so selfish, they end up being cursed by that instead of being selfless and being rewarded by that. And I think the rewards that came to Naomi because she was selfless speaks volumes. Any other comment before we go on to another question here? All right. Many in-law relationships are injured by efforts to control one another. Now, I hope that none of you have experienced that, but we know that that things that become somewhat cliche, there's a reason they become cliche. What do you find refreshing about Ruth's attitude toward Naomi? And why do you think Ruth behaved this way? What do you find refreshing about Ruth's attitude toward Naomi, and why do you think she behaved that way? What'd she say in verse 5?
She's very submissive. I mean, it's not an argument, it's not a discussion, it's, I will do whatever you say.
Don't you find that
I
refreshing?
trust you, yeah. I wish my kids could talk like that.
Why do you think she behaved that way? I mean, we don't know exactly how old she is, but she's probably, 30, 40, maybe, somewhere in there. She's a mature woman, is my point. She doesn't have to take instruction from anybody, but she readily welcomes this. Why do you think that is?
There's a little bit, I mean, obviously, I think you get the aspect that the fact that she followed her to Bethlehem is an indication of relationship, and that there's some mutual love and respect already, going all the way back to chapter 1, into chapter 1. So there's obviously kind of a baseline of love and respect. You're in a foreign culture. I mean, she's doing this thing on your own is probably not the wisest thing. I mean, she's listening to her, telling her how to make this thing work.
Mm-hmm.
Now she's going to branch out and do. She's going to ad-lib a little bit. But the fact is I mean, I think there is some underlying current of love and respect already.
Mm-hmm.
And so it certainly makes sense for her to be able to be obedient in this moment.
Just to add on to that, specifically in the text, one of the things that really stands out about Ruth, the book, as you read it, is that naming matters. We've talked about how over and over it's Ruth the Moabitess, a foreigner. You know, we talked about last week a little bit the titles that she used for herself and the titles that Boaz used for her. And that continues to be a point. But when you look here in chapter 3, verse 1, when Naomi addresses her, what does she call her? My daughter. I think that's significant and is a piece of evidence that backs up what Jess is talking about. There is a relationship here that began in Moab and was strong enough for Ruth to follow her all the way there. She's remained in her house, right? That's the last verse of chapter 2, and she lived with her mother-in-law.
I do think, and even we're going to tag team back and forth and not give Dill any time. I made this point, and I haven't fully worked it all the way out, but it seems to me that the last time that Boaz says to her anything, he says, my daughter. And then the next time he says Ruth the Moabitess, it's in context of the meeting at the gate.
The deal.
deal, right? And it's like, he calls her my daughter, and then he goes to the gate and he's like, well, you've got to take on Ruth the Moabitess. Almost as if, this is how I feel, but I want to make sure that I make it look as bad as I can to you. Now, like I said, I haven't worked it all the way out, but there's some aspect of this that's like, I think there's something here, but I want to make sure that this guy doesn't jump in. And so I'm going to make sure that he knows where she's from over and over again, because he's going to say it like 3 or 4 times inside just the deal in chapter 4. So, like I said, I don't know. I haven't parsed it all the way out, but I would be interested to know.
The naming matters.
Naming matters, that's right.
Absolutely.
Well, and we're going to touch on their relationship even in more depth, because it does appear that there's a mutual crush.
That's right.
You don't ever outgrow that possibility. So one of the things I want to highlight, though, in this question is this: despite the years of knowing each other, there was still a risk to do what Naomi was asking Ruth to do. Okay? Just as going into the field had a risk to it. For instance, and this is again contrasting the way many of our young people are growing up thinking about things. Ruth could have said, what if Naomi misread the situation? What if Naomi didn't know about relationships?
She's been out of the game for a while.
Was that?
She's been out of the game for a while.
She's been out of the game for a while. She could have looked at this like, she doesn't know how these things work. And yet, that's not how she approached the situation. She trusted her mother-in-law. She trusted her mother-in-law's understanding of the culture that they were in, and her mother-in-law's understanding of relationships, and said, I'll do whatever you say to do. That's refreshing. And I think if more who are in Ruth's situation would have that spirit, they would be blessed in a similar way that Ruth was blessed. Comments or questions?
I would just add another word to, you said that's refreshing, or her behavior is refreshing. She's wise.
She is wise, yeah.
She understands where she is. She's in this foreign land. She's with a woman who knows things about this, and she trusts. Despite everything else that Ruth herself doesn't understand, doesn't know, she said, okay, because of this mutual relationship that we have that's developed over time, the wise thing to do is to listen to what you say.
Yeah, and I'm going to guess that if I went around and asked each of us about our knowledge of relationships when we started having relationships, most of us would say, at the very least, we were inadequately prepared. Can I say that safely?
Yes, you can.
Okay. It's a wise person to be able to say, I'm inadequately prepared. Somebody help prepare me. And she had that wisdom and insight. And I think that is something, again, that could be learned today. That's what I tell my premarital couples. I said, nobody told me the stuff I'm telling you. And so Ruth understands that she needs that instruction. All right, somebody read 7 through 15.
When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man, and he turned and discovered a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer." "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All my fellow townsmen know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am near of kin, there is a kinsman redeemer nearer than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to redeem, good, let him redeem. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning." So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could recognize, and he said, "Do not let it be known that a woman came to the threshing floor." He also said, "Bring me the shawl you are wearing and hold it out." When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then he went back to town.
Okay, we're talking about relationships. This is a chapter about relationships that even in our adult classes, there's things to be learned about relationships. In many ways, the circumstances here are scandalous, or could at the very least invite rumors. Though not explicitly spoken, what was really happening here? I mean, she goes, there's a guy who's apparently imbibed significantly, he's asleep, she crawls up under his blanket at his feet and until he awakens. What in the world's going on?
And apparently there was no other women around that night when they get ready to go to bed. Because he says, don't let it be known that the woman came to the threshing floor.
So she's the sole woman. Again, you're just pointing out another reason why it looks pretty scandalous. But what's really happening?
She's proposing. I mean,
That's exactly what's happening. Yeah.
Which is further than Naomi told her to go.
That's right. Do what he tells you. Period.
Yeah.
Why don't you spread your garment over me? Oh, okay. So.
Yeah. Ruth was placing herself at his feet, expressing her willingness to be his wife. Cover me. This was not a sexual seduction. Okay, I think that's important to make. It was, as Chess points out, it was a proposal, and even in that culture, that was traditionally done by men, not by the woman. Yet some men need a little nudge, even today, right? So with Naomi's instruction, Ruth was giving Boaz a little nudge.
Do you think, like the initial reader, when Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, he goes to lay down, she came secretly, uncovered his feet, lay down. Do you think that you've got to start to cringe, right? Because Noah and his daughters, his sons, and it's almost similar language. Moab came from Lot and his daughters. Like, there's got to be a little bit of this that you're like, oh no, we're going to screw this up again. Like, this is going to happen. Like, we've seen this story unfold like this, and they've messed it up.
You're talking, in what way are you seeing this potentially messed up?
Well, I'm just...
If you've read your Old Testament and you hear about somebody who's drunk and a woman goes to him,
Yeah.
nothing good
Okay.
comes from that.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
In the past, in
Yeah.
anything in any of these previous stories.
Yeah.
And so in one sense, it's like a type scene in literature, and there's an expectation that goes along with it that gets severed here, because the language that's used, and I'm not a Hebrew scholar, but I read people who are, they explicitly state there is no sexual innuendo here in this language to suggest that there's something untoward, but it's cringeworthy just from the circumstances.
That's right.
But we have a clue, right? Because when she goes to him in verse 9, I am Ruth, your servant. She's naming herself again. She's gone from foreigner to a maid servant, just one of your hired servants out in the field, to a servant. And the Hebrew there is an escalation in rank for each one of those times that she's named herself. She keeps asking for a little more. But then she says, spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. And you mentioned before, she wasn't supposed to say anything. You're supposed to wait for him to know what to do and say so. But we ought to be remembering chapter 2, where Boaz is talking to Ruth in the field. The Lord repay you for what you've done, verse 12, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. And so she has sought relationship with the God of Israel by declaring her faithfulness to Naomi and staying in that relationship. She uses the same words back to him. Under, spread your wings.
Mm-hmm.
She's asking for relationship. She is proposing. And Boaz is on the spot now.
But he doesn't seem bothered by it.
But he's not bothered by it.
No.
And I believe that that's largely because Boaz is someone who honors the covenant with God. He is faithful to the covenant that God set up. We see that in the way he treats his workers. We see that in the way that he provides for Ruth and Naomi in the giving and going beyond the law, saying, hey, you don't just have to pick up from the ground. Pull some out of the sheaves and lay it on the ground for her. That's going above and beyond the law. And now, even though Ruth has come and she's kind of messed things up in one sense because she's made the proposal, he recognizes it for what it is and says, okay, but I'm going to be the person, I'm going to do what was intended, whether she's overstepped culturally or not. And then we find out there's this other guy who's an even closer person, and again we see Boaz's integrity and his devotion to covenant, whereby he is going to, he's trying to make it all above board and follow the covenant by bringing the other fellow into it. And I think that's behind the way he asked her, or the way he instructed her not to talk about having come there, to leave before she can be observed. He doesn't want there to be any impropriety or perceived impropriety that can get in the way of what they're planning to do.
Yeah. And I think that says a great deal about Boaz, and there's some even very practical lessons to be had in the one sense with juxtaposing what happens when you mix alcohol into a dynamic, the examples that Chess talked about. But the other is why Boaz wasn't alarmed was because Boaz was in charge of what happened at this point. He had a choice, and he chose to live by integrity and propriety in this a little bit scandalous moment, and wanted to make sure that it was handled properly. So there's a lot of very practical lessons to be had from this about how to do relationships at whatever age.
There's an interesting reference in Ezekiel 16 to some similarity with Ruth and Boaz. Verse 8 it says, and this is God speaking metaphorically of Israel, it says, "Later I passed by, and when I looked at you and saw that you were old enough for love, I spread the corner of my garment over you and covered your nakedness. I gave you my solemn oath and entered into a covenant for you, declares the sovereign Lord, and you became mine."
What's happening there, Roger?
This is the Lord. Just looking at the title for the chapter there, it says, "The Lord's grace to unfaithful Jerusalem." And so going back to look at that and see verse 1, it says, "The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, confront Jerusalem with her detestable practices and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says." And so it goes to that extent of showing that forgiveness of them, their nakedness perhaps being their sinful behavior, and God covering that and still accepting them into covenant.
It is back to that covenant relationship, which is, again, marriage is a covenant relationship. It's not a contract, which enables a person to do what God is wanting to do in the passage that you're talking about. Okay, you've been unfaithful, but I'm going to keep my part of the covenant. And I'm willing to cover you if you'll come and be covered. And so Ruth is asking to be covered. Which leads to this next question. Boaz clearly understood Ruth's proposal and praised her for it. What does Boaz urging Ruth to leave before the sun was up tell you about Boaz? We've touched on this a little bit, but what does it tell you about Boaz that he says, you need to be out of here before?
Propriety.
It's more evidence that he's a worthy man. That's how he's introduced in chapter 2. That he calls Ruth a worthy woman in verse 11 of chapter 3. He's a worthy man.
He is a worthy man, so we see his character. Now, what has Ruth's reputation developed into at this point?
Great character.
Great character. What if she's seen coming from the threshing floor?
Not great character.
Not great character. He's living out of his integrity. He's living out of his character, but part of his character is, I want to make sure your reputation doesn't get destroyed too. He's concerned about her in this as well. So he didn't want, as we've talked about, he didn't want a hint of impropriety to spoil their relationship. And I'm just guessing that in his heart, Boaz probably harbored hopes of getting married one day, but it hadn't happened. But God finally blessed this godly man because he maintained his integrity.
Why? I mean, obviously this is, I don't know, years ago, obviously. And was there another way besides a middle of the night awkward encounter for Ruth to drop the hint? I mean, or Naomi to like, hey, next time you're in the fields, when you just walk by and go, hey, can you spread your tent over us? I mean, I know that sounds simple, but I mean, we don't know, but it's like,
Someday when you're in the field,
inviting.
ask Boaz to come by the house on the way home.
Exactly.
I want to talk to him for a minute.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, you're inviting scandal. You know what I mean? Like, you're in that neighborhood of inviting. I mean, we're talking about the fact that their character is so much so that he's like, hey, this doesn't look good. So I need you to get out of here before the sun's up, but take this with you so that Naomi, who I know who's behind this, is pleased with what happened. You know, like there's a little bit of this that both of their characters are at stake in this night meeting. And did it have to be this way? Seems like it did, but because that's all we've got. But was there another way?
Naomi was the conspirator behind this. I mean, she said, here's what's going to be happening tonight. Mm-hmm. She knew exactly how the routine goes at the threshing floor, and she was exactly right. Mm-hmm. So you're kind of asking, why would Naomi push for it to be done this way? And I don't know the answer to that.
There's also a possibility that it was not intended for it ever to extend all night long. Ruth made a mistake. She was too quiet when she went. I'm serious.
Yeah.
She really was. The way Naomi tells it, when he goes to lie down, observe the place where he lies, then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. Because he's going to be awake. And he'll hear you come, and this will take place right when they start to go to bed, and then it'll be concluded, and you can come home, and we don't have the all night thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over. Behold, there's a woman here. He never heard her come. She was too quiet.
Yeah.
And so. She's too quiet. Then when he wakes up, he says, "Who are you?" She answered, "I'm Ruth, your servant." And that's enough, right? That answers his question. But then she proposes. And I think that part of his response to her is also to help her save face in this forwardness that she has expressed that's not normative in their culture any more than it is in ours, although I guess it's growing a little bit. But even today, in our culture, that's not the norm. Right? And so then we have the naming, may you be blessed. She says servant, he calls her daughter. The last kindness is greater than the first, right? What was the first kindness? The way she's treated Naomi. Mm-hmm. This last kindness, it's yet more care for Naomi. He understands, like you said, Naomi arranged this, and Boaz, and you said when she goes home, and I know what she's done. I know she's behind this, right? You've not gone after young men, which suggests Boaz is no spring chicken, to use that phrase we used earlier in class. Whether rich or poor, now my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy
one. Yeah. So, very practical question. In a world confused about dating, relationships, and marriage, what in this circumstance is worthy of imitating? What do you see in here? What are some lessons in here that are worthy of imitating?
But there is a degree of selflessness on the part of everybody involved. Mm-hmm. Right? You brought out the idea that Naomi, by pushing Ruth toward Boaz, if they decide to get together but they want to exclude Naomi, she's out in the cold.
Yeah.
Ruth might not be quite as enamored of this older gentleman as she might have been with the younger one, closer to her age perhaps. But because of her relationship with Naomi and an understanding of what it will mean if she does this for Naomi, she's willing to do this. Boaz, again, you see over and over again that that it seems he seems to be doing this because of the person Ruth is, not necessarily because he was out looking for a wife.
Mhm.
And so there's a degree of selflessness. And as you talked about in the very beginning, that's not the nature of what a lot of people are looking for in relationships in these times.
Good. What else do you see?
God moves in a mysterious way, his wonders to perform.
So maybe the lesson from what you're saying, Robbie, is do it God's way. He does amazing things when you do things his way.
And it wasn't easy. I mean, they had to go through death, moving, living alone without support. But it works out when you trust.
Yeah.
We just expect it to work out right now, take care of me right now. And he has been. We just don't like to see it that way because we're not satisfied with where we're at right now.
Our timetable.
And I think this ties in with what Bruce was saying too. And I think we, in American culture goes back to, I mean, we are, it's individualized Western culture. So what I want, what I need, those kind of things. And I think we treat faith that way. We treat our relationship with Christ that way. It's about my walk. It's about my faith. It's about, and we put my in there a whole lot. And so much of the Bible is about corporate church, corporate, my actions affect other people. And I think you can see Ruth in here, just, well, Ruth and Boaz, both, understanding that the way in which they treat people matters because it affects other people. Boaz comes to the fields and it's, may the Lord bless you, right? Lord be with you, and they bless him back. He's treated people with respect, and because of that, I think Bruce made this point, because of that, they treat her with respect. They don't misuse and abuse her when she walks into the field and starts to glean. And then he adds on to it at the end of it and says, make sure you take care of her. But she was already being taken care of because I think Boaz's character and the way that he treated people, and then the way that she worked and the way that she had, the kindness that Bruce talks about with her and Naomi, now it starts to reflect back on her character and how she's going to be treated. Like, everything is corporate, and we struggle with that. I mean, the story would look a whole lot different in 2024, you know? We would struggle with it.
So the importance of how you treat people, and to carry that just even a step further, how you care for people's hearts. You don't toy with them. You don't. You recognize those hearts can be injured easily. I think that's a great lesson. Let me just share a couple more. We'll go to this last section. Boaz seemed a little bit surprised that she would settle for an old man. Perhaps a lesson to be learned is that she was more interested in character than his age. I think that's significant. Having another set or two of eyes who can see where a good match is may be helpful. Godly eyes noticing character matches is what we see happening here with Naomi and Ruth. She saw the character match. Somebody read 16 through 18, and we'll begin to tie it up.
When she came to her mother-in-law, she said, "How did it go, my daughter?" And she told her all that the man had done for her. She said, "These 6 measures of barley he gave to me. For he said, 'Do not go to your mother-in-law empty-handed.' Then she said, 'Wait, my daughter, until you know how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest until he has settled it today.'"
All right, again, the counselor / human observer in me keeps coming out in these kinds of interactions. Naomi and Ruth sound like college girlfriends giddy about the budding romance. What does Boaz's gift of barley indicate? And secondly, what did Naomi understand about men? First of all, what did the barley indicate?
It's a wedding dowry.
I'm in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in. All right? But he's very deliberate and cautious because there's another guardian redeemer in the way, and so he deals with that. But the gift was more than being generous. The gift was a sign of his agreement. So what did Naomi understand about men?
He's in, and he's going to settle the matter. He is excited.
All right, so what does that say about men in general?
Are we impulsive? Do we get to say that? Is he
Well,
impulsive?
get
I don't know.
You could say impulsive, but
Deliberate.
I mean, what are we renowned for rather than listening?
Fix it now.
We want to fix things, and oftentimes we as men get tunnel vision on whatever it is we're working on. We see absolutely nothing else, and Naomi understood that. She said, listen, he'll take care of this right away. And guess what? Where is he the next morning? Well, that's chapter 4.
We haven't read that yet, so.
Yeah, that's
No
chapter
idea.
4.
Apparently he's already there. For Boaz had gone up to the gate. Past tense. By the time they're having this conversation back home, according to the writer, Boaz is already at the gate.
So Naomi, once again, is right about her analysis of human nature. She noticed the prospects of this relationship, and now she's watched Boaz and predicted essentially what he would do, and she was absolutely spot on with that as well. That he would go and he would take care of the matter. I mean, did he get up before sunup and head to the gate? It kind of appears that way. Thoughts about that?
Not necessarily that, but I think Bruce had made this comment about empty and full continuing to come up, and he specifically tells her, don't, right? Take these 6 measures of barley so that you don't go to your mother-in-law empty-handed, right? And instead she comes full of, right? Full of barley.
Except he didn't say it. Okay, I believe he said it, don't get me wrong. But in terms of the text, bring me the garment you're wearing and hold it out. So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley, and then she went to the city.
Yeah.
So what we have is his reported speech by her
Yeah.
that we hadn't heard before. We didn't hear that before but yeah, when she comes, she says, he said to me, you must not go back empty-handed. And then we're thinking about empty again with regard to Naomi. And yet again, she's provided for and is not empty.
Yeah. It would not be outside of Boaz's hearing to hear her say, I went away full, came back empty. And now he's going to make sure that she doesn't go back empty.
In fact, once she returns to Bethlehem, fullness is what describes her life.
Yeah.
In so many different ways. Great. Thank you all for your input tonight.